Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Cedric, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, I'm going to be talking about my Week 9 waiver wire targets for the 2024 fantasy football season. Over the course of today's episode, I'm going to be mentioning the best available players at the running back, quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, and defensive positions. Players who are not only going to help impact your lineups in Week 9, because there are two teams on bye, the Pittsburgh Steelers and San Francisco 49ers, but players who can hopefully fill in for injuries. Again, another consecutive week in which impactful players are getting injured. Brian Thomas Jr., Stephon Diggs, but not only that, Christian Kirk, Jordan Love, Gabe Davis, Jordan Mason, a lot of players that are going to be missing from our lineups. So hopefully the players that are available in your league can suffice, help you capture victories going forward and potentially for the remainder of the season. As we progress, the majority of the players that I'm going to mention over today's episode are going to be rostered in less than 40% of leagues. If you're looking for my thoughts on a specific player, you could travel down to the description of the video. Down there, we have timestamps. Also, while you're down there, be sure to click the bell notification button and subscribe. I will be live streaming after tonight's game between the Pittsburgh Steelers and New York Giants. Again, this video is being recorded before then. So if there's any players that have an impactful performance that kind of buys them as a potential waiver wire pickup, again, we will include that in regards to tonight's live stream, talking about those players and their overall availability and the prioritization of them within the upcoming waiver wire. Outside of that, at the end of today's episode, I will be putting together an entry in regards to Underdog. Again, if you guys haven't checked them out, as of right now, you can find the link down in the description. When you sign up using code Andrew today, making that first-time deposit minimum of $10 not only gets you to claim the first-time deposit offer, but you'll get my rankings sent to you every single Sunday morning for my email directly to yours for the remainder of the season. These are rankings by position, by tier, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, kicker, and defense, including flex, half PPR, full PPR, all-encompassing rankings. So for those of you who are interested in potentially following the upcoming picks, getting my rankings every Sunday, check out the map to the right side of the screen to determine your eligibility. If in fact you are not eligible but still want to go ahead and get some rankings, you can always check out the Patreon. Link is also down in the description. Thank you very much for all the support. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's begin by talking about these wide receivers specifically. These wide receivers, KEON, JAKOBI, MCCONKEY, JUJU, Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, and JALEN McMillan are all wide receivers that should already be rostered going into this week. None of these players should be available in your league. As of right now, Coleman, 41% roster, JAKOBI, 59%, MCCONKEY, 62%, Jennings, 59%, Ricky Pearsall, 37%, and JALEN McMillan, 49%. Again, if you don't already have these players rostered in your league, do yourself a favor and get them and prioritize them first before we talk about the next slate of receivers. Again, when we talk about KEON Coleman, the last 2 weeks, 7 targets in each game, but 14.5 and 15.5 fantasy points, able to produce incredible numbers and getting himself red zone utilization. Of course, Amari Cooper completely disappeared within the overall matchup yesterday. When we see Amari Cooper playing 38 of the 76 overall snaps as an offense, and KEON Coleman's playing 63 of the snaps and getting the vast majority of opportunity next to, Khalil Shakir, that definitely makes a huge difference. JAKOBI Meyers, again, in the last 3 games in which he has played without Devontae Adams in the lineup, 7.4, 10.2, and most recently, 14.2 fantasy points with 10, 9, and 7 targets, a lot of opportunity. Then we go to MCCONKEY, of course, the number 1 receiving option of the Chargers offense in terms of receptions, targets, receiving yards, and now recently getting closer within that receiving touchdown category, having scored 2 against the Saints this last week, and of course, continuing to be of value. Even though the 49ers are going on bye week, JAUAN Jennings and of course, Ricky Pearsall are of value going forward. One of these two are going to continue to fill in for the absent overall targets from the season-ending injury of Brandon Ayuk. Both these guys of value. And then JALEN McMillan, again, Sterling Shepard getting injured. We still have the prioritization of that offense going to KEATON, but JALEN McMillan will be the number 2. Now, if we want to continue on in regards to talking about players who probably are available in your league, let's begin with Cedric Tillman, a player that is currently only rostered in 19% of leagues. I picked him up in my home league, the most important league I play in, mainly because T. Higgins went out yesterday morning. I don't know if you guys were realizing during the live stream, I was like, who should I pick up? And then I was like, oh wait, Cedric Tillman's still sitting here. Let's see what he's capable of accomplishing. And even though I was very pessimistic about his potential upside because I still wanted to wait and see what Jameis Winston was going to provide for this roster, the performance that we saw out of this entire offense was ridiculous. I mean, Jameis Winston coming out with 330 plus passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns against the passing funnel like the Baltimore Ravens. It makes sense, but even then, it was still a surprise to continue to see the Cleveland Browns offense with another quarterback not named Deshaun Watson continue to play well, which it shouldn't have been a surprise. Joe Flacco proved it last year, and now we have the veteranship of Jameis Winston continuing on. Cedric Tillman in the last 2 games, 12 targets and 9 targets. 8 catches, 7 receptions, 81 yards, 99 yards, and then, of course, his most recent performance, 2 receiving touchdowns, 25.4 fantasy points as we continue with Jameis Winston just being a loose cannon, someone that wants to continue to throw the ball, 35 plus times per game, and the offense finding themselves success in doing so. With the offensive line finally healthy and giving him time within the pocket, of course, Cedric Tillman is going to be of value. Now, when we continue on with this Cleveland Browns conversation, I want to also talk about Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore coming off of a game of 12 targets, 8 catches, 85 yards, all while Cedric Tillman and Jerry Jeudy and David Njoku on National Tight Ends Day were all relevant. I'll get to my thoughts on National Tight Ends Day when we get to the tight end section, but my goodness, every single receiving option of this offense was finding themselves an abundance of success. So going forward, if they are going to continue to let it air out, especially this week taking on the Los Angeles Chargers, which their secondaries dealt with a couple injuries recently, Elijah Moore, who played the least amount of overall snaps amongst all wide receivers, led the team in terms of total targets. As long as that is going to be the case, of course, he is certainly of value, only rostered in 2% of leagues. The next player I wanted to mention, very similar to Elijah Moore, is a slot receiving option by the name of Josh Downs. Now, if in fact you had dropped Josh Downs or someone in your league dropped him because of the overall efforts of Anthony Richardson lately, it would not surprise me, mainly because Anthony Richardson has not looked great. And there's a possibility that as we progress, Joe Flacco may be the starting quarterback of that Colts team going forward. Based on the recent performances of Anthony Richardson, the organization is obviously finding themselves losing far more games than they potentially would if Joe Flacco was going to be the starter. We're going to have to wait and see how they want to progress that. But either way, Josh Downs coming off of a week of 9 total targets. Yes, he made a singular catch that was wide open that went for 69 yards and a touchdown and made his entire week. But the 9 total targets is something of value that we want to keep in mind going forward. As long as opportunity is there, it could potentially lead to fantasy success. Moving on to our number 4, we have DeMarcus Robinson, wide receiver of the Los Angeles Rams. Now, even though Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp are going to be fully back, last time out, both of them played about 50 to 57% of the overall offensive snaps against the Minnesota Vikings. But as we progress, those numbers are going to get up to the 90% range because typically within an overall Sean McVay offense, we oftentimes see 3 wide receivers and only 3 wide receivers play. Maybe we'll see a couple sprinkles of Tutu Atwell or Tyler Johnson going forward. But when we talk about the overall offensive snap counts, DeMarcus Robinson played 85% against the Minnesota Vikings in comparison to Tutu Atwell, who played 13% of the offensive snaps. Obviously, DeMarcus Robinson coming off of a game in which he scored 2 touchdowns on 3 total targets, ridiculous overall week. But this is very reminiscent of what we witnessed last season at the back end of the year. From weeks 13 through 17, DeMarcus Robinson in the 2023 season was averaging 13.34 fantasy points per game and a half PPR as a member of this offense when they were firing on all cylinders, when, of course, Matthew Stafford was at a full rate, which as of late, looks like he's getting into that overall kind of momentum. Now, throughout that span of time, weeks 13 through 17, DeMarcus Robinson, 6.8 targets, 4.2 receptions, 64 receiving yards per game, and scored 4 touchdowns in the last 5 games of the 2023 season, which is why he was of such value and why I believe he could very easily be in that conversation going forward. Number 5, we have Michael Wilson. Michael Wilson was able to find himself another great week of success, able to score double-digit fantasy points. This all despite the fact that Trey McBride and Marvin Harrison had themselves incredible weeks. This was the best offensive performance from the Cardinals all season long. I mean, I look at that, that week 2 performance against the LA Rams. I don't even consider that to be their best performance because it looked like the Rams pretty much folded in that game and just stopped trying after a while. But going into this week, again, I did not anticipate the Arizona Cardinals to be able to not only win this game, but offensively produce as well as they did. This was the best game that Kyler's played through the air. And going forward, if this momentum continues, Michael Wilson, a player who has scored over 9 fantasy points in a half PPR in 4 of the last 6 games, could continue to be more of a value play, currently only rostered in 16% of leagues. Then we go on to Parker Washington. Like I mentioned at the beginning of today's episode, Christian Kirk's season-ending injury. Brian Thomas Jr. is anticipated to miss 2 to 4 weeks with a rib injury. Gabe Davis left yesterday's game with an injury. That pretty much makes the most valuable receiving options of this offense for the Jacksonville Jaguars. First and foremost, Evan Ingram. Second of all, if Travis Etienne is going to be back, obviously within him, the receiving game could be utilized. But then it's Parker Washington, who pretty much fills in as the next most veteran receiver of this offense. Now, even though Parker Washington isn't an elite overall talent, he will be given the ample opportunity to find himself potential for success going into the upcoming matchups ahead of them. Obviously, they have an upcoming bye week, but until then, Parker Washington, in the absence of Kirk, BTJ, and Davis, certainly will be of value. Now, I want to go ahead and also mention 2 other players that you could potentially consider. JUJU Smith-Schuster, if in fact he was potentially dropped because of his injury, there's a potential in which this offense, who is getting themselves elevated, continuing to make trades to improve this team, with DeAndre Hopkins in the overall conversation, pulling attention, getting more utilization out of guys like Xavier Worthy, there is a potential in which we could see JUJU Smith-Schuster out of the slot position continue to be of value once he is fully healthy. And then Adam Thielen's our number 6, mainly because, again, he is going to come off of the IR soon. Once he is available, again, we have heard rumors that Deontay Johnson is most likely going to be traded out of this offense. There's always a possibility that Adam Thielen could also be traded. Many people were looking to potentially trade for Cooper Kupp. Maybe they could take a discount and throw a 7th round pick for Adam Thielen and get him in exchange. He might end up on an offense like the Pittsburgh Steelers or somebody, maybe he goes to the Minnesota Vikings. You never know. There's always a possibility that he could end up in an offense that could certainly increase his overall potential for fantasy success. All right, moving on. Let's talk about the running back position. Obviously, the first 2 or 3 players that I'm going to mention should already be rostered. Again, the first player I wanted to mention is Alexander Mattison. He's currently already rostered in 60% of leagues. Again, if you don't already understand, he is the full-time starting running back of the Raiders. Yeah, sure, he didn't have himself a great rushing day against the Kansas City Chiefs, but no one really has. But either way, if Alexander Mattison somehow, some way is still available, please pick him up. TRACY is another player we wanted to mention. And of course, on top of that, Jaylen Warren, both players that are playing in tonight's game. I have no idea how they're going to perform tonight. Obviously, I have myself a couple assumptions as to which one of these players are going to be able to potentially go higher or lower on their overall underdog entries going into tonight. We'll mention that at the end of today's episode. But, TRACY, I have no idea how he's going to play, but I anticipate him to be the clear number 1 back in comparison to Devin Singletary. When they asked the head coach, Brian Daboll of the New York Giants, if we're going to see more utilization out of Devin Singletary going forward, he did not want to give a designated confirmed answer. He just said, we're just going to see how these running backs play and who we're going to use more often than the other. And it was pretty much just kind of deflecting. I think TRACY has secured the RB1 position and will be able to prove that tonight. In regards to his overall rostership, 52%. Again, if he's not already rostered, please do yourself a favor. He is a potential full-time starting running back for an offense that going forward is going to be of value because of the upcoming matchups. Then we have Jaylen Warren, who I talked about last week in the same overall conversation. Someone who's probably going to get themselves 10 to 12 touches per game, be able to play 50% of the running back offensive snaps. Last season finishes RB25 overall on a half PPR, nearly averaging 10 fantasy points per game. Then we move on to running backs that are kind of insurance policies. Guys like Isaac Guerendo, again, with the injury last night too, Jordan Mason once again going down with that shoulder injury and not returning to the overall game. It gives us an understanding that perhaps, even if in fact Christian McCaffrey is to return after this week's bye and is returning in week 10 to play for the San Francisco 49ers, if anything was to happen to Christian McCaffrey, I honestly don't even trust that Jordan Mason's the backup. I would assume that Isaac Guerendo going forward is his primary handcuff. So if you have Christian McCaffrey on roster, do yourself a favor and pick up Isaac Guerendo, only rostered in 8% of leagues, because he is not only the immediate handcuff, but if there is a delay to the return of McCaffrey, he's obviously proven that he is the healthy back, and Kyle Shanahan does not tolerate if Jordan Mason is going to find himself injured in the game, and he's obviously not going to throw him back in there because he believes that Guerendo is more than capable of being able to carry the ball 15 plus times and lead them to victory. The next player I wanted to mention is Keaton Mitchell of the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, Keaton Mitchell is coming off of a season-ending injury last year, in which prior to that injury was highly efficient as a running back. Obviously, they opened up his 21-day window to return to potential action. Obviously, practiced last week. As we progress, we're going to have to wait and see how he wants to get implemented within this offense. We know that he is a running back that can take a singular run to the house. And obviously within this offense, considering how well they have played, at times, of course, Derrick Henry will disappear because of the overall game script. But if they're going to continue to kind of implement Keaton Mitchell into the overall rushing attempts that typically go in the direction of Justice Hill, or even the receiving workload that goes into the direction of Justice Hill, he could certainly be a value within arguably one of the best running attacks in the National Football League. And then the final player I wanted to mention is Blake Corum. This is more of a PSA in regards to, please, roster your handcuffs, please. Public service announcement: if you don't have the handcuff to your blue chip running backs, the volume of injuries that take place to actual impactful players every single week should scare you enough to pick up one of these guys. Do yourself the favor. It doesn't have to specifically be Blake Corum, but at least as long as you have the handcuff to your RB1 on roster and somehow, some way they are still available in your league, do yourself a favor. Because again, with players like Stephon Diggs and Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas and all these other running backs that have gotten her over the course of the season thus far, the Christian McCaffreys, the Jonathan Taylors, if you don't have the complement of the handcuff on roster, there's a lot of value that you could lose, and it really could impact your team in a negative way going forward. All right, let's go on to the next position. Let's talk about the tight end position. I wanted to give my thoughts on National Tight Ends Day. I don't understand how in one specific day, the NFL record is broken for the most tight end receptions in a singular week. On top of that, we have every single tight end that is ranked within our top 12 to 16 balling out, scoring touchdowns, and having incredible performances. I don't understand it. Why can't it be tight ends weekend or a tight ends day every single week? Why can't every Sunday be a national holiday for a position to where they are popping off? So at least we know who's going to be of the utmost value. Either way, going forward, these are three tight ends that currently are rostered in the following percentages. Zach Ertz, 28%, Hunter Henry, 39%, and Tyler Conklin, 19%. If they're not already rostered, again, Zach Ertz coming off of a week in which he had 11 targets, 7 catches, 77 yards. The last 3 weeks in terms of a half PPR, 8.8, 12.0, 11.2. Incredible performances on a consecutive basis, averaging 7.25 targets per game in the last 4 games. Then I continue to talk about the tight end position in regards to Hunter Henry. Hunter Henry, again, even though we did see a quarterback switch from Drake May to Jakobi Brissett, once Drake May is back in the lineup, we know that Hunter Henry is his favorite target, and going forward is going to continue to be of value. Then we move on to Tyler Conklin. Back-to-back weeks of scoring a receiving touchdown in the absence of Allen Lazard due to that injury and the complete absence of Davante Adams. I don't even know where Davante Adams has gone. He went from being a Raider to a Jet and has not been impactful at all within that overall offense. So Tyler Conklin definitely down in the red zone, making himself a name to be known. Now, when we continue on with the tight end conversation, I want to talk about players that are potentially widely available. Mike Gesicki, 8% rostered. In the absence of T. Higgins, definitely stepped up with 8 total targets, 7 receptions, 73 receiving yards. If T. Higgins is going to miss again with a quad injury, Mike Gesicki is certainly going to be of value. Then we move on to Will Dissly. In the last 2 games, 18 total targets for 13 receptions and 122 receiving yards. 1% rostered, highly utilized, and with all of the injuries that have taken place within the Chargers receiving core and even at the tight end position, Will Dissly continuing to provide a lot of upside within the receiving game at the tight end position. Then we move on to Adam Trautman. Adam Trautman coming off of his best week of the season in which he's able to get himself a touchdown, 4 receptions, a lot of yards. Overall, a pretty solid week. It was a surprise to see that the Denver Broncos threw the ball 37 total times against the Carolina Panthers, but this week the Denver Broncos have an opportunity of taking on the Baltimore Ravens. We have seen many of tight ends cook that defense. Bowers 9 for 98, Ferguson 6 for 95, Ertz 4 for 68, Otten 8 for 100, and Njoku most recently 5 for 61 and a touchdown. Adam Trautman could be implicated to being a solid overall play, currently rostered in 0% of Yahoo leagues. Let's move on to the quarterback conversation. We only have 3 this week because really these are the most valuable, and if in fact they are available, be sure to pick them up because you, I'm sure, have a quarterback going to the bye week sooner rather than later, and you want to prepare for that. Matthew Stafford, coming off of a week in which he had 279 passing yards, 4 passing touchdowns against the Minnesota Vikings of all defenses. With Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp finally back, we have Matthew Stafford at an elite level, similar to where he was last season, weeks 12 through 17. Throughout that span of time, 15 passing touchdowns in the final 6 games of his 2023 campaign, averaging 20.3 fantasy points per game throughout that span of time. Throughout those 6 games, he was a top 12 overall quarterback in 5 of those 6 games for fantasy purposes. Then we move on to Bo Nix, currently rostered in 25% of leagues. His last 4 performances for fantasy, 23.1, 20.7, 14.1, and 29.8, coming off a performance of 4 total touchdowns, 3 through the air, 1 on the ground for 284 passing yards against the Carolina Panthers defense, and now gets an opportunity of taking on a passing funnel like the Baltimore Ravens, who have struggled, on top of the fact that Bo Nix thus far this season is averaging 6 points per game on average in terms of rushing statistics isolated. When you're getting an additional 6 points just off of his rushing, contributions, anything he's able to accomplish through the air is just a bonus going forward within a given week. Then we move on to Jameis Winston, coming off of a week in which he had 334 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns. His upcoming schedule consists of the Chargers, then a bye week, which again, that's why I have him as my number 3. He could be a great play this week. Obviously, if you play in a super flex, I'm assuming he's already rostered. If potentially you wanted to pick him up after the bye week, Saints, Steelers, Broncos. Not the greatest overall matchups, but we do believe that Jameis Winston should be able to deliver regardless. Even if he throws 3 picks in a game, we would assume he throws either 3 or 4 passing touchdowns because that is what he has proven throughout his entire career. All right, let's move on to the special teams and defensive conversation. Let's talk about our kickers. Jake Bates, kicker of the Detroit Lions, currently rostered in 35% of leagues. His last 3 fantasy performances are 19, 8, and 12 fantasy points. The Lions as an offense have scored 42, 47, 31, and 52 points in the last 4 games they have played. They are lighting up defenses, so whether it is PATs or field goals, opportunities have certainly been there for Jake Bates. Then we move on to Will Reichard, 14% rostered. His last 6 games in fantasy, 11, 12, 7, 16, 15, 8. How is he rostered in 14% of leagues? It seems like there's only 14% of leagues that are actually paying attention on Yahoo. But as of right now, he has demonstrated that he is a top 8 fantasy kicker over the course of the season and continuing on. Then we move on to Matt Gay, who has been able to score himself over 8 fantasy points in each of the last 5 games, averaging about 9 fantasy points per game throughout that span of time. And especially if they're going to transition back to Joe Flacco as the starting quarterback, it elevates his value that much more. Then we move on to the overall defensive conversation, beginning with the New Orleans Saints. They take on potentially Bryce Young and the Carolina Panthers. If in fact we are going to have Deontay Johnson potentially traded, he would not be activated. And if in fact Andy Dalton's injury is significant enough to hold him out, the last time, of course, the New Orleans Saints took on the Carolina Panthers, their defense scored 14 points in week 1. Most recently, we have seen defenses against the Carolina Panthers put up 14, 5, 16, and 7. Again, the Denver Broncos were quite disappointing this past week. I would have thought more, interceptions or turnovers would have been caused, but we'll take what we got. Then we move on to our number 2, the Cincinnati Bengals taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. These are the last 5 games in which defenses have taken on the Las Vegas Raiders offense. Fantasy point-wise, 8, 17, 13, 16, and 11. Again, you would fire up any defense against this overall offense who is continuing to turn over the ball at a very quick rate. Then we move on to the Tennessee Titans. They take on the New England Patriots this week, and outside of the Jets yesterday, every single defense has played well against them recently. 16, 22, 6, 12, and 9 fantasy points. Again, the Jets, a complete disappointment. But outside of the Tennessee Titans, again, like I mentioned, they take on the New England Patriots. I also want to mention the New England Patriots defense as a potential play within the given week. These are the defensive performances against the Titans this season. 24, 11, 21, 2, 3, and then 11 and 16 in the last 2 weeks. Obviously, huge performance from the Detroit Lions this past weekend. Obviously, we could end up seeing a lot of upside from the New England Patriots defense, which typically over the course of the season has never been started as a defensive play outside of maybe playing against the Miami Dolphins when they had Tyler Huntley at quarterback. All right, that's going to cover it in regards to our overall waiver wire pickups for week 9 of the 2024 fantasy football season. Before we conclude today's overall episode, I want to go ahead and pop up on screen the overall entry that I'm putting in with tonight's overall game between the New York Giants and Pittsburgh Steelers. My 2 most confident plays out of the group are TRACY going higher on receptions and Wan'Dale Robinson also going higher on receptions. Considering the offensive line deficiencies of the New York Giants, my assumption is that Daniel Jones is going to have to get the ball out of his hands relatively quickly. And even though this is a away game in which Daniel Jones is a significantly better quarterback in all overall aspects, I still do anticipate him to get the ball out of his hands, considering TJ Watt is trying to get after him every single down. Now, as to where you pair him up with, whether it's a George Pickens play, a Najee Harris, a Russell Wilson, that is your prerogative. I've gone ahead and lowered the overall receiving yard total for George Pickens under the assumption he should easily be able to surpass this, but my 2 most confident plays, TRACY going higher than 1.5 receptions, was able to get himself 3 receptions last week, and additionally was able to get himself 65% of the overall routes ran out of the backfield in comparison to Eric Gray and, of course, Devin Singletary last week. Continuing on, should be implicated within that receiving role. And, of course, Wan'Dale Robinson surpassing this number, I would say 6 of the last 7 games within the overall season. Those are my favorite plays going into tonight's game. I appreciate y'all. Be sure to check out Underdog, link down in the description, and use code Andrew to get those rankings every single Sunday morning and potentially tail these picks going forward. I'll be back later tonight after the Monday Night Football game and, of course, after the World Series game. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.